Millionaire picked up a 5-year-old girl on the road at night. She didn't tell him why she was alone, but she gave him a note. After reading it, the man turned pale. A crisp autumn breeze rustled the leaves outside Victor Hastings' stately home. By any measure, Victor was a man of wealth and success. His empire stretched across continents. His fortune estimated to be in the billions. But despite his riches, Victor lived by a simple philosophy. Wealth was to be respected, not worshipped. His parents, both humble teachers who had seen their son rise beyond their wildest dreams, had always emphasized the importance of integrity and kindness over affluence. From a young age, Victor's life had been carefully shaped by these values. His father, Gregory Hastings, often shared stories of his own hardships and the simple joys that carried him through those times. "Money is a tool, son, not a purpose," he'd remind Victor. His mother, gentle but firm, taught him compassion, a gift she said was worth more than all the gold in the world. These principles became the pillars of Victor's identity, grounding him even as his businesses flourished and his wealth grew. Despite living in a luxurious estate and managing properties across the globe, Victor led a life far removed from opulence. He would often dress plainly, donning comfortable jeans and modest sweaters, valuing comfort over status. His wealth allowed him privacy and security, but he actively avoided flaunting it, believing that real wealth was about the quality of his relationships and the impact he could make on the world. His humility, however, didn't shield him from the reality that surrounded him. People were quick to judge based on appearances. He had seen the fascination that his wealth inspired, often finding himself scrutinized for the slightest hint of his fortune. He knew too well that, for many, his money was the true allure, the key reason they pursued his friendship or loyalty. So, he guarded his heart, protecting himself from those he suspected cared more about his bank account than the man he was inside. Yet, with all his success and all the protection his wealth afforded, Victor longed for something more, something money couldn't buy. He sought a love that would see him, not as a millionaire, but as Victor, the man his parents had raised with love and integrity. As Victor's empire grew, so did the crowd of people vying for his attention, each with smiles and promises. He was used to the polished conversations, the assurances of undying loyalty, and the flattery that danced around him wherever he went. Yet, beneath the gilded surface, he sensed the emptiness. Behind every friendly handshake or warm smile, he couldn't shake the feeling that people saw only his wealth, not his heart. Over time, his wealth began to feel like both a blessing and a curse. He was grateful, of course, for the life he'd built, for the chance to make a difference with charitable projects and create jobs through his ventures. But he knew his wealth had also placed him behind an invisible wall. He was surrounded by people, yet he felt more alone than ever, yearning for a partner who could see beyond his fortune to who he truly was. Victor's heart craved someone who would love him not for his power, his status, or the luxuries he could provide, but for his mind, his character, and his soul. He wanted to be valued for the kindness his mother had nurtured in him, for the humility his father had instilled. He dreamed of a relationship like his parents', unwavering, built on shared values, mutual respect, and a deep understanding that went beyond words. In his quiet moments, when the weight of his solitude felt especially heavy, he would question if such a love even existed in the world he inhabited. He'd heard stories of wealthy men who had given up on finding true love, contenting themselves with relationships that felt transactional or superficial. But Victor held out hope, certain that there must be someone who would love him without the influence of his riches. He vowed to wait, no matter how long it took, for someone who could see the real Victor. This desire became a quiet ache within him, a prayer whispered to himself in the stillness of his home. And when he met Sarah, a woman who seemed to be everything he had hoped for, he thought, just maybe, that his wait was finally over. When Victor met Sarah, it felt as if a long-awaited answer to his silent prayers had finally arrived. She was unlike anyone he'd encountered in his world of excess and superficial charm. Sarah carried a warmth about her, a gentleness that seemed untainted by material concerns. She was an artist, passionate about her work but modest in her lifestyle, living in a cozy apartment filled with books, sketches, and the faint smell of oil paints. It was her spirit, unadorned by luxury, that drew him in. Their connection blossomed almost immediately. From their very first conversation, Victor felt a sense of ease with her that he hadn't felt in years. Sarah asked about his dreams, his fears, his family. Questions that felt more genuine than any he'd been asked in ages. Unlike so many others, she didn't probe about his wealth or inquire about his estate. Instead, she shared stories of her own struggles and aspirations, listening intently whenever he opened up about his past. For the first time in a long time, Victor felt seen. Their relationship grew rapidly. He found himself looking forward to their dinners at small, unpretentious restaurants, their afternoons walking through city parks, and the quiet moments spent talking about everything and nothing. Sarah seemed to value his ideas and his character, not his possessions. She was endlessly patient, empathetic, and wise beyond her years. She understood him, he thought, in a way no one else had. When Victor proposed to Sarah, it was with a full heart. He was confident she loved him for who he was and not for what he could provide. Standing under a twilight sky, he watched as her eyes lit up with joy as she accepted. In that moment, Victor was certain he had found the partner he had always hoped for, a woman who would stand by him, not because of his wealth but because of the connection they shared. He could almost hear his parents' voices, their values echoed in her sincerity and simplicity. But as the days passed, doubt began to creep into his heart. It was subtle at first, just an unsettling feeling that he couldn't quite place. Little did he know that this doubt would soon grow into the seed of a plan that would change everything. With the engagement sealed, Victor's life seemed brighter than it ever had before. He had finally found what he had been yearning for, a partner who cherished him, not his wealth. He'd shared the news with his family, and they had immediately embraced Sarah, welcoming her warmly into the fold. Victor's parents, in particular, had felt at ease with her, their approving glances reassuring him that he had chosen well. Planning the future became a cherished ritual. Victor and Sarah spent hours talking about their dreams for a life together, imagining a family, and building a home filled with love and laughter. Sarah seemed genuinely moved by the simple gestures he made, finding joy in the little things. She talked often about how love, kindness, and loyalty were the pillars of any strong relationship, mirroring the beliefs Victor's parents had instilled in him. He felt a profound peace in knowing he'd found someone who seemed to share his core values so deeply. As their bond grew, Victor found himself swept up in excitement for their wedding day. He imagined the look on her face as she walked down the aisle, imagined the life they would lead, a life filled with authenticity, one built on mutual respect rather than wealth or status. He felt more grounded, certain that he had found not only a loving partner but a best friend. Yet, for all his certainty, there was still a whisper of doubt. Although Sarah had given him every reason to trust her, he couldn't shake the feeling that something wasn't entirely as it seemed. As much as he wanted to dismiss it as pre-wedding jitters, this gnawing uncertainty grew stronger, inch by inch, pushing him toward a decision he would soon come to regret. As Victor and Sarah spent more time together, those quiet whispers of doubt turned into unsettling observations. Though subtle, Sarah occasionally seemed captivated by luxury. Her eyes lingered on expensive cars, designer brands, and upscale restaurants in a way that hadn't seemed obvious at first. There were moments he brushed off as harmless, small instances that on their own seemed insignificant. But together they painted a picture that troubled him. One evening they were out with friends at a casual bistro, a cozy spot with mismatched chairs and candlelight that Victor loved for its simplicity. As he ordered their usual fare, he noticed Sarah's gaze drift to a sleek restaurant across the street, the kind with velvet ropes and gold-plated menus. Later, as they walked past, she had casually remarked, "It must be nice to dine somewhere like that once in a while." He hadn't thought much of it then, but as similar comments started adding up, his discomfort grew. Victor tried to ease his concerns by treating her to a weekend away at a quaint countryside inn, a place known more for its peaceful charm than its lavish amenities. But instead of delight, Sarah showed disappointment, noting the simplicity of the room and commenting on the limited menu options. Her reactions, though subtle, felt increasingly telling. He began to wonder. Had he been mistaken in thinking that she valued simplicity? Was her affection for him truly sincere, or had he overlooked a desire for luxury beneath her warm exterior? As much as he tried to ignore these thoughts, the pattern was undeniable. Sarah's occasional fascination with wealth and status didn't fit with the genuine woman he believed he'd fallen in love with. Feeling torn, he wrestled with his own sense of loyalty and intuition. He wanted to believe in her, to trust that her heart aligned with his, but he couldn't ignore the signs any longer. His unease grew, and soon Victor found himself at a crossroads. Desperate to know the truth, he resolved to test Sarah in a way that would reveal her true nature. It was a risky plan, one that filled him with dread and hope alike, but he knew he had to see her sincerity for himself, without the filter of wealth. Determined to reveal Sarah's true character, Victor devised a plan that would lay bare her values. He would visit her unannounced, disguised as a man of far humbler means. His goal was simple yet profound. He needed to know if Sarah's love was for him alone, or if it was entangled with his wealth and status. The decision weighed heavily on him, and the thought of what he might discover left him restless. In the days leading up to the test, he prepared carefully, choosing old worn clothes that were plain and nondescript. He dug out a tattered sweater from his college days, scuffed shoes he'd once relegated to yard work, and jeans that had long lost their crispness. He even mussed his usually neat hair, practicing a more stooped posture, one that spoke not of confidence but of quiet humility. Standing in front of his mirror, he was almost unrecognizable, transformed from a poised businessman to a man seemingly untouched by privilege. On the day he set out, he felt a strange mixture of dread and anticipation. What if he found that his suspicions were right? What if Sarah failed to see past his appearance? He could feel his heart racing, but he forced himself to remain calm. This was his only chance to see her unfiltered reaction, to witness her compassion or lack thereof. He took a deep breath and made his way to her modest apartment. As he approached her building, Victor steeled himself, rehearsing the humble demeanor he planned to adopt. He reminded himself that this test was necessary, that knowing the truth, however painful, would be worth it. It was better to face heartbreak now than to enter a marriage built on a fragile illusion. And so, with his heart pounding, Victor knocked softly on Sarah's door, waiting to discover the truth about the woman he loved. Victor stood on the doorstep of Sarah's apartment, feeling an odd vulnerability he hadn't anticipated. Dressed in shabby clothes, he no longer looked or felt like the confident, self-assured man he was accustomed to being. Every fiber in him felt exposed, as if the worn sweater and battered shoes stripped away not just his wealth, but his identity. He drew a deep breath, steadying himself. This was his moment of truth. After a few moments, Sarah's door swung open, and there she was, looking just as radiant as he remembered. But her smile faltered when she saw him. For a moment, her eyes held a flicker of recognition, but then they shifted, scanning him up and down, taking in the sight of his threadbare clothes and tired expression. He could see the initial surprise in her eyes harden into something colder, and he felt the first pang of disappointment. "Can I help you?" she asked, her tone polite but laced with an unfamiliar edge. Victor kept his voice low, almost hesitant. I'm sorry to bother you," he stammered, trying to maintain the guise of a weary stranger. "I was wondering if you might be able to spare some kindness. Just a little warmth, maybe a cup of tea." His words sounded rehearsed, and he held his breath, waiting for her reaction. She regarded him for a moment in silence, her gaze flicking from his face to his worn clothes and back again. It was a simple request, something he hoped would stir her compassion. After all, the woman he thought he knew would have welcomed anyone in need. But the way she looked at him now made him question everything he had once believed. The moment stretched uncomfortably, and Victor felt his chest tighten as he waited, desperately hoping that she would show him kindness, that she would still be the woman he thought she was. Victor's heart thudded in his chest as he continued his humble plea. "I don't mean to intrude," he said softly, keeping his gaze lowered. "It's been a rough day, and I thought perhaps, if I could have just a moment to rest." The words felt strange coming from his mouth, a far cry from the usual confidence in his voice. He swallowed hard, trying to maintain the facade, hoping against hope that she would see him, not for his appearance, but as a fellow human in need of a little compassion. Sarah's expression wavered, and for a brief second, Victor thought he saw a glimpse of the kindness he remembered in her. But her face quickly hardened, her brows knitting together in visible irritation. She crossed her arms, glancing down the hallway as if worried someone might see her speaking to him. "I'm not sure this is the right place for you," she said, her voice cool. "I don't think I can help." Her tone was polite, but it held none of the warmth he had once believed was genuine. Victor felt his heart sink, but he pressed on, hoping to find even a small crack in her reaction, a sliver of compassion he could cling to. "Please," he whispered, his voice barely audible. "I just need a moment to gather myself. I won't trouble you for long." Her eyes narrowed slightly, her patience clearly wearing thin. "Listen," she said, the edge in her voice now unmistakable. "I don't know you. And frankly, I don't feel comfortable with this." She took a step back, her arms crossed defensively. "Maybe there's a shelter or something where you can go." Each word cut deeply, unraveling the image he had once held of her. This wasn't the woman he had fallen in love with, the one he had hoped to spend his life with. She seemed indifferent, almost inconvenienced by his presence. And as he stood there, feeling both ashamed and heartbroken, Victor couldn't deny what he was seeing. The woman he thought he knew was perhaps nothing more than a mirage. Victor stood there, absorbing the chill in Sarah's words. For a fleeting moment, he clung to a faint hope that perhaps she was simply having a difficult day, that something had clouded her usual kindness. But then she took another step back, her expression shifting from irritation to outright disdain. "Honestly," she muttered, her voice sharp, "I don't have time for this." She glanced over his shabby clothes with a look of clear distaste. "People around here are always looking for handouts. Just because I look approachable doesn't mean I'm here to give away charity." The words hit him harder than he could have imagined. Victor felt his legs weaken, almost as though he might buckle under the weight of her contempt. This was the same woman who had laughed with him under the stars, who had listened with warmth as he shared stories of his family. He had believed her to be compassionate, empathetic, a kindred soul. Now she was a stranger, her words cutting through him like icy shards. For a moment, Victor struggled to find his voice. I understand," he stammered, feeling a profound sadness wash over him. "I didn't mean to offend you. I thought you might understand." Sarah scoffed, crossing her arms tighter around herself. "Look," she said, her tone firm and unyielding, "I'm sure you have your story, but I don't have the time or resources to take care of random strangers. You need to move on." In that instant, Victor's heart broke completely. The warmth, the compassion he had once seen in her, it was gone, or perhaps it had never been there at all. He felt the sting of betrayal and the cold realization that the woman he thought he loved had cared more for appearances than for the substance of a person's heart. And as he looked at her one last time, he knew he had discovered a painful truth. He had been deceived. His knees felt weak, and he sank down, kneeling, not in supplication but in heartbreak, as the reality of her callousness consumed him. As Victor knelt, feeling the weight of despair settle upon him, his mind replayed every tender moment he had shared with Sarah. The evenings spent laughing over simple meals, the whispered promises, the dreams they had sketched together of a life built on mutual respect and understanding. Each memory now felt hollow, tainted by the realization that the love he thought he'd found was nothing more than a facade. For a long, agonizing moment, he stayed on his knees, overwhelmed by the sadness of knowing that the woman he'd been prepared to spend his life with had failed the test of compassion. His heart felt heavy with disappointment, the kind that no wealth or status could heal. He had been searching for someone who would see beyond his riches, who would love him for who he truly was. And here, in his lowest moment, he faced the painful truth. Sarah's love was not rooted in the genuine values he had cherished all his life. Slowly, he rose to his feet. His heart bruised but his resolve firm. He knew that he could not ignore what he had witnessed, could not simply move past the callousness she had shown. This was no small oversight, no fleeting lapse in kindness. It was a revelation, a glimpse into a character that could not offer him the love and sincerity he so deeply desired. Victor took a steadying breath, the sadness still fresh, but there was also a hint of clarity. He had learned, in the most painful way, that his intuition had not misled him. And as difficult as it was, he understood that facing this truth now was better than living a life shadowed by false affection. Victor steadied himself, casting one last look at Sarah, who now appeared more a stranger than the woman he had once dreamed of marrying. He removed his old, tattered cap, letting it drop to his side, and stood tall. Gone was the weary posture he'd adopted as part of his disguise. Instead, he faced her with the strength and clarity of the man he truly was. "Sarah," he said, his voice now steady, revealing the confidence he'd been masking. She looked at him, her expression shifting from annoyance to shock as she began to piece together the truth. "Victor," she stammered, her face paling as realization dawned. Her eyes widened, darting from his face to his worn clothes, and then back to his eyes, which now held a steely sadness. What's going on? Why are you dressed like that?" He let the silence settle between them for a moment, allowing her to absorb the gravity of the situation. "I needed to know," he said softly, "if you would care for someone who came to you without status, without money, someone who appeared to need your help." "Victor, please, I didn't know," she said quickly, her tone now pleading. Her earlier indifference melted into panic as she seemed to grasp the implications of her behavior. She took a step forward, reaching out as if to close the distance between them. "I thought you were. I didn't realize." But Victor took a step back, his heart aching as he watched her scramble for excuses. "You didn't realize what?" he asked, his voice filled with the pain of betrayal. "You didn't realize that kindness isn't only for people you know. You didn't see the need to show compassion simply because you thought I was beneath you." She opened her mouth to respond, but no words came. Her earlier confidence had been replaced by a fragile defensiveness. I was having a bad day," she murmured, her voice trembling as she struggled to justify herself. "I just didn't expect." Victor shook his head, feeling the finality of the moment settling over him. "Sarah, I loved you," he said, his voice filled with both sorrow and resignation. "I thought you loved me for who I was. But now I see that you only valued what I could give you." Her eyes filled with tears and she reached for his hand, but he pulled away, the pain too fresh, too sharp to allow for closeness. He had seen the truth, and there was no going back. Victor's words hung heavy in the air, each one piercing through the silence as Sarah's face contorted with desperation. She tried again, her voice unsteady. "Please, Victor, it's not what you think. I was caught off guard, that's all. You know me, you know I'm not that person." Her tone was pleading, her earlier coolness replaced by a frantic need to make him understand. But he could see past her words now, see the gap between the woman she'd pretended to be and the one standing before him. His heart twisted painfully, knowing that despite his deep desire to trust her, he could no longer ignore what he had seen with his own eyes. He felt the weight of his parents' teachings settle in him, a reminder of what mattered most: character, empathy, and integrity. "Sarah," he said, voice soft yet unyielding, "I wanted to share my life with you. I wanted to build a future with someone who would love me, no matter what I had to give or what I could provide. But today you showed me who you truly are. You showed me that kindness and respect are conditional to you. They depend on who's asking for them." He paused, the sadness in his gaze deepening as he let his words sink in. "I don't think you would ever be happy with me, not truly. You would always be looking for something more." Her expression shifted, and for a moment, a flicker of anger appeared, mingling with her panic. "How could you do this to me?" she asked, her voice edged with bitterness. "You deceived me, coming here like this. Humiliating me." Victor felt a wave of resignation, realizing that her anger only confirmed what he had feared most. "I didn't deceive you, Sarah. I gave you a chance to show kindness to a stranger. I hoped you would see past appearances. But you didn't." She stood there, speechless, her face a mixture of shame, anger, and desperation. He felt a final pang of sadness for the woman he had loved, the woman he had once thought was his future. But he knew now that he couldn't ignore the truth of her character. Taking a steady breath, Victor met her eyes one last time. "Goodbye, Sarah," he said quietly. "I hope one day you'll learn that love and respect can't be bought. They have to be earned." And with that, he turned and walked away, leaving behind the life he'd almost mistaken for his own. As Victor left Sarah's apartment, a profound emptiness settled over him. The woman he had once imagined a future with, the one he'd trusted with his dreams and heart, was now a painful memory. Each step away from her felt like he was shedding a layer of his past, one built on illusions rather than truth. The days following their final confrontation were marked by difficult conversations with family and friends. When he shared the news of the broken engagement, his parents listened with heavy hearts but offered him their unwavering support. They had watched him build a life of integrity, and while they shared his disappointment, they were relieved he had uncovered the truth before it was too late. Ending the engagement brought its own set of grief. Victor mourned not only the relationship but the future he had envisioned. He had imagined a lifetime filled with warmth, partnership, and shared dreams, and letting go of that dream felt like a loss he hadn't anticipated. But he knew deep down that he had made the right decision. The cost of staying with someone who lacked sincerity and compassion was far greater than the pain of letting go. As he reflected on their time together, he realized he had been blinded by his own hopes, seeing only what he wanted to see. He had ignored the red flags, dismissing them as minor flaws in his vision of a perfect future. But now, with clarity, he knew that his choice to end things was a way of reclaiming his own integrity and values. And while the sorrow lingered, he felt a quiet strength building within him, the beginning of a new chapter that would hold true to his beliefs. Victor's heartbreak weighed on him, like a storm that refused to pass. In the quiet days that followed, he withdrew to his estate, finding solace in the familiar places he loved, the library with its rich mahogany shelves, the garden his mother had once tended. His grief was private and raw, but his family and friends rallied around him, offering support without judgment. They understood that he needed time to process, to heal from the betrayal and loss. In moments of reflection, Victor often thought back to the small but telling signs he had ignored. He realized now how much he had wanted to believe in the dream of finding someone who saw past his wealth, someone with whom he could share a deep and genuine connection. The disappointment ran deep, not just in Sarah but in himself, for letting his hopes cloud his judgment. Despite the sadness, he began to find perspective. Conversations with his parents brought him comfort, their gentle words reminding him that true love would never demand he compromise his values. They encouraged him to stay open-hearted, to remember that while wealth could attract others, it was his character that defined his worth. Gradually, Victor allowed himself to feel gratitude for the painful experience. Yes, it had brought heartbreak, but it had also taught him resilience. It reminded him of the strength in knowing what he wanted, a partner who was loyal, sincere, and grounded in compassion. He realized, too, that this heartbreak had fortified his understanding of himself, of his need for authenticity and kindness, and his belief that he would one day find love that valued him for exactly who he was. As the days turned into weeks, Victor felt a quiet transformation within himself. He found solace in revisiting the values his parents had instilled in him, values that had defined his life long before wealth and success had entered the picture. With every moment of reflection, he grew more certain of one truth: real love and respect came from character, not possessions. He had come close to compromising this belief, but now he was more grounded in it than ever. His time away from the world of romance gave him the clarity he had long needed. Instead of filling his days with business deals or social events, he focused on reconnecting with the things that had once brought him peace. Walking through the gardens his mother had loved, volunteering at local charities, and mentoring young entrepreneurs who needed guidance more than funding. Through these humble acts, he rediscovered the joy of helping others, and in the faces of those who sought nothing from him but his time and wisdom, he found a renewed sense of purpose. In his quiet reflections, Victor acknowledged that he was no longer looking to fill a void. What he truly desired was not merely a partner but a companion who understood life as he did, who shared his values and could stand beside him with humility and strength. He realized that love was a rare gift, one that could only flourish in the presence of honesty, respect, and a shared commitment to something greater than wealth. Victor's heart had been scarred, but it had also been fortified. He knew that someday he might meet someone who valued him not for his bank account or status, but for the man he was at his core. Until that day, he resolved to live in gratitude, grateful for the wisdom he had gained and for the strength to walk away from anything less than genuine love. With time, Victor's heartache faded, replaced by a calm resilience and renewed focus. He channeled his energy into things that mattered deeply to him: his family, his community, and the charitable causes he had once felt too busy to personally engage with. He funded scholarships for underprivileged students, built homes for families in need, and even set up a foundation in his parents' names, dedicated to causes that they had always championed. This work brought him a sense of fulfillment that he hadn't felt in years. It reminded him that wealth, when used for good, could truly make a difference, not just in his own life but in the lives of countless others. And through these acts of generosity, he found himself surrounded by people who valued him not for what he owned but for the way he chose to live and give back. His family noticed the change too. The heaviness that had once lingered around him had lifted, replaced by a quiet but unmistakable joy. He laughed more freely, spent more time with friends, and embraced life with an openness that seemed both new and old, as if he had rediscovered something essential about himself. And in these moments he found contentment, knowing that he was on the path meant for him, one that was genuine and true to his heart. Victor realized that he was no longer defined by his wealth or status, but by his character and actions. He was ready to embrace the next chapter of his life, one built on a foundation of authenticity, humility, and compassion. As the months passed, Victor's life became richer in ways that had nothing to do with money. The friendships he rekindled and the connections he built within his community grounded him, showing him that a life of substance was measured not in assets but in the quality of relationships and the kindness exchanged. One evening, at a charity event he had helped organize, Victor met Emily, a woman with a warm smile and a natural grace that drew him in immediately. She was a teacher who worked with underprivileged children and shared his passion for helping others. As they talked, he found himself captivated by her sincerity. There were no pretenses, no attempts to impress, just honest conversation and genuine curiosity about his life, not his wealth. They began seeing each other more often, finding joy in the simplest moments, walking through the park, enjoying quiet conversations over coffee, or volunteering together on weekends. Emily's grounded nature and compassionate heart reminded Victor of everything he'd been searching for. She admired his dedication to his causes, often encouraging him to continue his philanthropic work. She had her own dreams and ambitions, and in each other, they found a shared vision of a life built on giving, not taking. As their relationship grew, Victor found himself feeling hopeful once again. Emily valued him for who he was, not for what he could offer. For the first time, he experienced a love that didn't feel conditional, a connection that felt both healing and whole. In Emily, he found the partner he had been searching for, someone who saw him not as a millionaire but as a man with a kind heart and a desire to make the world a better place. With Emily by his side, Victor felt he had finally found the love he had once feared was out of reach. Together they built a life centered on shared values, compassion, and purpose, each supporting the other in their goals and dreams. The wealth that had once felt like a barrier was now simply a means to do good, a way to uplift others, and to share a life of meaning and generosity. In quiet moments, Victor would sometimes reflect on the journey that had brought him here. He thought back to the heartbreak with Sarah, to the disappointment he'd felt when he'd discovered the truth about her. At the time, it had seemed like an unbearable loss, but now he understood that it had been a gift in disguise. That experience had taught him to look beyond the surface, to trust his instincts, and to value himself enough to demand honesty and kindness in return. Through the pain, he had gained wisdom, strength, and clarity, qualities that made him a better partner, a better friend, and a better man. Victor came to believe that life's challenges often led us to exactly where we needed to be, no matter how difficult the path. His journey had been one of trust, betrayal, and ultimately self-discovery. He had learned that true love isn't found in riches or status, but in the quiet, sincere moments that make up a life shared with someone who values you for exactly who you are. And as he looked forward to the future, Victor felt a deep sense of gratitude. He understood now that love built on character and integrity was worth waiting for, worth every trial and heartache along the way. For the first time, he was at peace, knowing that he had found a love rooted in respect, kindness, and truth, a love that no amount of wealth could ever buy.